And I know from other conversations with you that you're still very committed to the approach and to the values of participatory community learning spaces, and making those spaces open up, and that's what's needed for learning in the world today. Can you say a little bit more about why that radical approach to education is so relevant for 2020 and what we're going through right now?
Wow, yeah. I mean, that's a big question. It's such an interesting time. You know, I guess without getting overly philosophical, because I could go off on a big tangent on that, but I do feel that we're going through a really powerful paradigm shift, you know, and I think of the writings around the Great Turning and a lot of the prophecies. I do think that what's unfolding is actually a much deeper shakeup than, you know, than some might hope it is, you know, that it's not a temporary thing. And I actually think that it's a remarkable time and opportunity, even though it's coming with a tremendous amount of discomfort. I actually really believe that what's unfolding is kind of an opportunity for us to move towards a type of society that really, and culture that really creates space for each of us, you know, to be our fullest version, and to be able to live into just the birthright of our being. And I guess, you know, and that brings me back, it takes me back to another tangent around, you know, when we would do these lines in the facilitation course around, like, is it for us to fit in society, or for society to adapt so that we can all fit the way that we are, you know? And I actually think that that's what's happening. You know, things are shaken up, and a lot of the boundaries that have kept things in place, and norms and systems are really starting to fracture in ways that we can viscerally feel and experience. And I think it's showing itself especially around what's happening around racial equity and justice, with the, you know, on the heels of George Floyd being killed, and what's cracked open since then. Mm-hmm. So I guess all to say, with the like fragility of the environmental crisis that, you know, was so elevated leading up to that COVID period, which just really halted us all, and now racial equity kind of being you know, it's always been a strong call and cry for justice, but now it's at exponential levels and is demanding a different kind of attention at the mainstream level. So with all of these conditions, all to say, I think that these approaches are kind of just the right medicine to be able to support us in figuring out how to recalibrate, because I think more than ever we're realizing that, like, certain voices have often been prioritized. Our world has often been constructed around the desires and values and priorities of some. And so how do we actually create space and opportunity for those who have felt most unheard, marginalized, completely excluded, to be able to give shape to a reality that is actually going to allow them to sustain and thrive? Because ultimately, we all need to feel that we can sustain and thrive if we're going to survive collectively. So to be able to find space where people can feel empowered to express their truth, their desires, their fears, their hopes, and realize that there's going to be differences, like realizing, like, yes, there's always going to be difference. There's always going to be tension and conflict, but that's actually a tremendous opportunity if we have spaces and containers for dialogue and learning that are ready for that welcome that and say, yes, let's bring our differences and understand not how it is that we need to convince each other that it's not about being right or wrong, but how do we actually find a way to live with our differences, you know, to find that place of overlap and connection, and be able to hold the complexity of our different realities. And so it's kind of this, how do we move into a place of multiple truths, you know, where there can be many different parallel experiences at once, and that we have the capacity to hold that, because I think things will only become more complicated. And so we're having to build up a new muscle, I think, collectively. And so these kind of learning spaces provide that chance to figure out how we can do that in ways that are sustainable and that feel possible.
Yeah.
Especially with the racial equity piece, you know, that's been a lot of my work over the last number of months, and so many organizations are in a moment of being like, we don't know what to do. There's like you know, people are feeling a call to react, to do something. It was coming out with a lot of groups and organizations putting out statements, and then a strong call for people to say, well, this can't be about words anymore. Like, this is not about curating a good message. This is actually about supporting like very deep unraveling of institutional norms and values and recalibrating. And so I think, again, there's a tremendous opportunity in that, to really find ways to slow down together and to realize like how it is so easy to reproduce some of these systemic inequities in actual time. But sometimes our own efforts and attempts to kind of create change are still reproducing those same patterns. And so I think it really requires a lot of slowing down and doing things differently and being willing to be vulnerable in a totally different way than we have been before, you know, and that the personal and the public are, those lines are, you know, they were never separate, but have often been kept separate. But I think now less so, you know, realizing like it's not as easy to separate our personal identities from our professional identities, because they're all one. They're so deeply intertwined, and it affects how we interact and engage with one another.
Yeah.
I've found that taking the time at the beginning of conversations to just get a chance to hear where people are at feels more important than ever. You know, something to the effect of a check-in of some kind. Because it often just provides, I think, such useful information, you know, when people realize like, oh yeah, I've got a couple of kids in the background and this is going on, or my connection keeps cutting out and I might not be able to stay on this call, or yeah, I just found out that someone's been sick and I'm needing to tend to them. I mean, I think that to some extent the conditions we experience now are not so radically different than they were, but I'm noticing there's so much more space and permission and empathy now around just the challenges that people hold on a day-to-day basis. You know, like I feel like there's a lot more willingness and acceptance for people to say like, oh, that sounds like a lot, or oh, of course you're not able to be here as present in this moment as you'd like to be, and that there's a lot more forgiveness than there once was, which I think is a remarkable shift. And so I think just creating more space to be able to understand where people are at is, in general, is just such useful information as a facilitator, but for the whole room, because it kind of brings our humanity into the space. And often what others are experiencing are often challenges that we ourselves are experiencing, and I think it's just a reminder that it's a very full time and we're holding a lot, and that might just impact the way that we show up in a space and gives more forgiveness to the ways that we might misinterpret people's actions. You know, there can be it's so easy to misinterpret, I think, over technological spaces like this sometimes, visual cues and tones. It's very different than being in physical space with someone. And so I think the more that we can understand of how people are arriving into the space, it allows us to then understand more about the conditions of how it is that we're moving through that space together, even though it's from a distance. So I think that's one of the key pieces. And another one, which I've kind of already named, and I really think is a powerful one, is like the capacity and willingness to slow down. And I think over Zoom rooms, that's even a harder thing sometimes, but the power of a pause, like when it seems like something is happening in the space, or that there might be like a microaggression or something playing out, or some kind of subtle dynamic that isn't useful, or that something's happening for someone, they're feeling impacted by something. that finding the moment to pause is really important. And I think as a facilitator, again, I find it's very different trying to read 25 screens at one time than it would be trying to sense into the physical energy of 25 people in a room. It's a lot of information to take in. So I think it requires like an extra kind of astuteness. I think co-facilitation during this time is particularly powerful. You know, smaller rooms for a single facilitator. If it starts to be more than a certain number, having multiple facilitators so that if someone's really actively engaged, the other can be keeping attention out for physical cues, which is what we would normally do as co-facilitators in a shared physical space as well. But I think in Zoom rooms, it's particularly important because it's really easy for things to slip by, when you're reading your visual cue off of a box like this in front of your face.
We're coming to the end of our time, and I know the comments we're going to get is people want more to hear more from Natalie, and that we should have made this interactive so they could ask you questions directly. But maybe just as some closing words, say a little bit about this approach that you've developed over the years for co-curating participatory learning spaces for people. How does it contribute to social justice and transformation in the world today? How does it deal with those big issues that all adult educators are trying to make a difference in?
I feel like we are in a time of deep transformation, and that there is a strong need for us to recalibrate. That the way that we've been functioning collectively as a human species doesn't feel sustainable, and that there's far too many people that don't feel that they can thrive under these conditions. And so it feels like we're at the beginning of a much bigger overhaul, and what you and I might see in our lifetimes, who knows, but I do feel that like every connection that we have. So I really do believe it begins with ourselves. The more that we can like be in really good and right relationship with ourselves, and that idea of right relationship that I learned from many beautiful Indigenous elders, be they Mi'kmaq or Anishinaabe or Haudenosaunee. But that if we can be in right relationship with ourselves, that's a first step to how we can be in right relationship with the earth, with plants and creatures, and with one another, and that our personal learning and interchange will impact the way that I then interact with you, and our own interpersonal dynamic, and the interpersonal dynamic I have with everybody in my life, no matter how close they are with me. And that ultimately, if there's good health and well-being in those relationships, that's going to begin to change our systems, and actually begin to align the way that we construct our world and our systems around us, because those are a product of our creativity. And so I do believe that these spaces are the seed for us actually trying to figure out together how do we recalibrate and work towards something that is far more life affirming and appreciative of just life, of like the magic of being alive and human, and what we can do with our creativity. Yeah.
Beautiful, Natalie. Thank you very much. Thank you for throwing in the word seeds there in your last comment, because we're talking about seeds of radical education. And people that have a look at this video are going to get a free downloadable copy of your essay, which I'm sure they'll enjoy. So thanks so much for your time today.
Thanks so much, David. It's always so nice to chat with you.
All right, cheers.